It started as an ordinary summer in the small town of Ravenwood, a quiet, peaceful community surrounded by endless stretches of farmland, winding dirt roads, and an old train line that had not been in service for decades. People there lived simple lives. They knew their neighbors, trusted one another, and rarely locked their doors at night. But what happened in Ravenwood over the course of several weeks in 1997 still unsettles anyone who hears it, because it left behind more questions than answers. The story begins with a man named Richard Hawley. Richard was 45, a local handyman known by everyone. He was friendly, hardworking, and reliable. He lived alone in a small farmhouse after his wife had passed away, but despite his loneliness, he never seemed troubled. He often helped neighbors repair fences, fix leaky roofs, or haul supplies. For most people in Ravenwood, Richard was someone you could depend on. One late evening in July, Richard was seen at the town's only gas station. The cashier remembered him buying a pack of batteries, a flashlight, and a bottle of water. He smiled, made a small joke about preparing for a blackout, and left. That was the last confirmed sighting of him. The next morning, his truck was found abandoned by the side of Old Mill Road, not far from the disused train tracks. The driver's door was wide open, and the keys were still in the ignition. His flashlight lay on the passenger seat, unused. Neighbors assumed the truck had broken down and that Richard had walked home. But when he never showed up for work, people grew concerned. By evening, the sheriff's department organized a search party. Men and women from the town, along with officers, combed the fields and woods near where the truck was found. They followed dirt trails, searched abandoned barns, and even brought in dogs. The dogs picked up Richard's scent at the truck and followed it along the road for about half a mile. Then, strangely, the trail ended in the middle of a cornfield. There were no footprints leading away, no signs of a struggle, nothing. It was as if Richard had walked into the corn and vanished into thin air. Days turned into weeks. Posters went up. Flyers were mailed. People in Ravenwood locked their doors for the first time in years. Rumors spread. Some whispered about accidents on the old train line, others about strange lights people had reported seeing in the sky. A few even muttered about something darker in the fields, something that had been there long before the town. But none of these theories had evidence. Richard Hawley was simply gone. 3 weeks later, just when hope was nearly lost, Richard came back. On a humid August morning, a farmer named Charles Bennett spotted a man walking along the road near his property. His clothes were dirty, his hair matted, but it was unmistakably Richard. When the farmer called out, Richard stopped, stared blankly, and then slowly walked toward him. His expression was strange, not relief, not fear, but something unreadable, almost empty. When questioned, Richard could not explain where he had been. He claimed he remembered driving down Old Mill Road, parking his truck, and then waking up in the middle of the fields 3 weeks later. He insisted no one had harmed him. He wasn't hungry, he wasn't dehydrated, and strangely, there was no sunburn or weather damage on his skin despite being outdoors in the peak of summer. Doctors examined him, but aside from fatigue, he was physically fine. Psychologists suggested he may have suffered some kind of dissociative episode, a sudden memory loss or breakdown. But the oddness of his reappearance, the fact that his clothes were barely worn, that he had no injuries or signs of exposure, left everyone unsettled. The town tried to move on, though whispers continued. Richard returned to his routine. He fixed roofs, mended fences, and shared beers with old friends. Outwardly, he seemed the same, but people who knew him well noticed subtle differences. He no longer laughed as easily. His eyes wandered off during conversations, as if he was listening to something far away. At night, his neighbors claimed they sometimes saw him standing in his yard for hours, staring at the cornfields without moving. Then, in late September, Richard disappeared again. This time, there were no clues. His truck remained in his driveway, his tools untouched in the shed. One neighbor reported hearing his screen door creak open around midnight, followed by footsteps on the gravel, but when she looked outside, the yard was empty. Richard was never seen again. Months later, during harvest season, a group of children playing near the abandoned train tracks found something unusual. Hidden under the weeds and dirt was a small, weathered notebook. Inside were pages filled with Richard's handwriting. Most of it was rambling, incoherent sentences, but one line repeated several times, almost obsessively. "They keep calling me back." The notebook offered no explanation, only more questions. Some believed Richard had stumbled onto something in those fields that night in July, something that wouldn't let him go. Others thought he had gone mad, his mind unraveling in ways no one could understand. But the strangest detail remained. If he had been missing outdoors for 3 weeks, why had his body shown no signs of it? Where had he been during that time? And who or what was calling him back? Ravenwood eventually fell back into its quiet rhythm, but Richard Hale's farmhouse still stands, empty and untouched. Locals say that sometimes, late at night, a light can be seen flickering in the upstairs window, though no one has lived there in years. And if you stand near Old Mill Road, where his truck was found, some swear you can hear faint footsteps in the cornfield, fading into silence. The man who disappeared once and returned was unsettling enough. But the fact that he disappeared a second time, this time forever, is what makes Ravenwood's story a chilling mystery with no true ending.